Hello everyone, my name is Shayanti with the UNM Division of Community Behavioral Health. Welcome to today's presentation for the Community and Rural Psychiatric Residency Program webinar series. A couple of announcements before we get started. Please make sure your sound system is muted during the presentation. If you have any question, please put them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself if Dr. Mathison opens the floor. For those requesting continuing education credit, we will share an evaluation link towards the end of the presentation. To receive a certificate, you must attend the full presentation. Also, please note, you will only have 48 hours to complete the survey before the links become inactive. So without further delay, I would hand it over to Dr. Mary Mathison.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to see my presentation. I am not sure how many of you all are familiar with sociologic concepts, and especially as they apply to psychiatry, but this is an area of deep passion for me. I have my undergraduate degree in sociology, and I really came into medicine and psychiatry in order to make a difference in social determinants of health, which is certainly the area that I'm sure most of you are working in. So without any more delay, I'll get started on my presentation for today. Well, here's my bio. And then this is just some continuing education reminders for those of you who are pursuing requests for continuing education today. Does anyone need me to leave the screen up, or have you all had a chance to review all this information?
And I will share the link at the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll just move on to the next slide then. And I don't have any conflicts of interest related to this content. And these are my views, and I'm not representing the views for University of New Mexico. So our learning objectives for today are first to be able to contrast suicide rate at a population's level with suicide individual risk factors. Objective number 2 is to recognize and associate some populational histories that impact the suicide rate. So that's not necessarily their individual suicide risk factors, but it can impact that, and it's something to keep our eye out for. And then the third objective is to apply sociologic factors in suicide to your work in the public health setting. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions or comments about any of the objectives? Okay, I'll go ahead. For this presentation, I'm focusing on Emil Durkheim. He's one of the fathers of the science of sociology. When sociology first came into practice or into kind of public interest, Emil, there was a lot of sort of questioning about whether sociology is a real science and has something real to bring to the scientific fields as a social science. Mr. Durkheim is a white French sociologist. He lived in historically, and so obviously his work is kind of reflect some of those things. But his goal in one undertaking that he did, he wrote a book called Suicide. And if you want to have some attention, just read that book on public transportation and people will come and say, "Are you okay?" It's just like this white book and it says suicide in red. But his goal in creating this work of literature was to really prove that this act that many of us, I think today, still think of as a highly individualistic act, sort of culturally, we feel that way. And his goal was to show that there are social factors that impact risk factors, and he indeed was able to prove that through some very rigorous research and work, and showed that suicide rates vary strongly with national borders, economic factors. And so within these like really strict social categories, the rate of how often people choose to end their lives or attempt to end their lives is really deeply impacted, and it's very, very statistically significant. And so that was kind of his goal, was to link this concept of social factors to something that we think of as highly individualistic. And this was really one of the founding works that separated sociology as a discipline. So one of the famous things about this study is that he created a grid, like kind of an axis system. And on one axis, you have you can think of it as an X and Y axis. So on one axis, you have this concept of anomie versus fatalism. So like at the top and bottom, these are the two terms he's using. And so I just wanted to take a moment to go through some of these definitions with you all. So anomie is a state of normlessness. You can think of it as being like nameless, without a name.
The next morning, we never got a decent night's sleep because it was so damn hot. It was like 80,
Someone's not muted.
85, and there's no air conditioning.
Denton Stewart,
Clearly.
can you please mute your system?
It just, the first night we had just like a little hiker's hostel place, and it was
Can you please mute your system?
It was too hot. You couldn't get a good sleep, and it matters now.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Mr. Denton
I mean, those are the
Stewart,
kinds of things that you can't necessarily factor in, but yeah, not having enough water, too much heat, too many mosquitoes, all those things that prevent you from really getting a good night's sleep, which is
Mr.
critical.
Denton Stewart,
Everyone,
So anyway,
if everyone can just
went
please
in,
mute.
We went in, it's 3.5
Can you
miles
please
to get
mute
to
your
this backcountry
system?
lodge where I had 4 nights
which
reserved.
is conflicting with our
I'm-
presentation.
And
I'm not sure if I'm able to
about it
mute
was that
participants. I don't think I
I
have that.
could pay for
Ready.
I can
the room and
text you.
board because during the summer they offer meals there.
Huh.
So you don't have to bring in your food like the last time I was there with a British guy, we brought in our food and we made stew for ourselves for 3 days.
That's great. I love stew. That's great.
And it was wonderful. And he insisted on making real, bring red meat in. That's what we're gonna have: red meat, carrots, potatoes.
I'm
And
not
we're gonna
sure.
I don't know what to do.
3.5 miles one way.
Let me
And we're
see.
gonna
I
make it
can mute
ourselves.
him. Oh, yeah, I can mute him.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. I think I've clicked through some slides here accidentally. Let's see if I can just. Okay. So anomie is a state of normlessness. So that is like you can think of it as being without a name. And that is like you have very low regulation. So you're kind of not feeling like you're having cohesion and solidarity. And this accompanies rapid social change. So this can impact suicide rates in terms of like someone is suddenly very wealthy. All of a sudden they're like a lottery winner. This is someone who has had like an extreme change in one of their social categories, and they're no longer feeling like a cohesive sense of regulation of how they are, what are their norms, who are the people that they are integrated with, and that kind of thing. It also would happen with someone like you can think about the stock market crash, and you can also think about people who are unable to fit in with like a norm, like a set of norms and regulations. So the example that I have put here is a single mother who can't afford to provide basic needs for her children, may do something to provide those needs that wouldn't be along in her set of norms that she would identify with. So, for example, when I was a housing case manager for unhoused families, I had a mom who shoplifted toilet paper. Believe it or not, she was arrested for this. And I think about like the number of steps where I feel like as a society at times we're just missing a lot of empathy in order to like actually have her arrested for this. Someone has to not just like take a minute and talk with her about it, but instead like really escalate the situation. And this was just so difficult for her. But you can see why her loss of power and her loss of norms the like needs of her, basic needs of her children were higher of a priority than that for her. Let's see, I'm trying to, I've got like this little thing over my screen here, and I'm trying to just move it so it's out of my way. Okay, I can close these windows out here. And then the other end of that is fatalism. And so that's like when your regulation is very, very high. So people who are experiencing fatalism feel that they don't have room for their individual passions, and they're sort of the things that give them purpose and meaning in their life have been sort of choked out systematically. So you can think of this as people maybe who were just released from an institution, such as, I mean, and psychiatric institution would, a long-term institutionalization psychiatrically would also fit this, where they've had this regulation and this schedule. Veterans are also big in this category. They've had this like regulated, super highly regulated by the system life. And then when they're released from that, they feel like a loss of sense of purpose. So this is like, you can think of this as like sweatshop labor, farm labor, in many instances, prisoners, overworked students, corporate employees, these people who feel they don't have their own sense of direction and ability to regulate their own lives. It's fatalistic, if that makes sense. The other axis has altruism on one side and egoism on the other side. So altruism is when your integration is very high. And so you have regulation on one side and integration on the other side of the axis. Integration is something where you are really, really involved in society, close friends, people who are around you. And so in order to have a very, very high integration, like beyond sort of this healthy level, the person themselves sometimes thinks that they have no value without this set of integration that they're involved with. So this is like someone who is, again, sort of feeling this lack of purpose in their life. But you can also think of this as people who are making a sacrifice and choosing perhaps to end their life in a more, where we would as a society think of this more as a heroic thing. So kamikaze pilot, you have people who are terminally ill and they don't want to be a burden, and falling on the grenade. Other acts of heroism are kind of high integration. So they are valuing the group that they're integrated with over their individual value, if that makes sense. And then you have egoism. Egoism is not necessarily in the traditional sense that we kind of as a society think of someone who's egoistic, but this is someone who is too caught up in their individual situation and they are not feeling integrated. So this gets into people who are really living a very chaotic life, such as like we see in the psychiatric emergency services, a lot of people who struggle with substance use disorder and housing status, separation from their family, someone who has a chronic debilitating disease where they are unable to do the activities that formerly brought them, a sense of purpose. That's also their integration now has lowered. And like as a group risk factor, this is increasing. So you have a higher rate of suicide in folks who are experiencing some of these things. So here, this is now the overall graph. So you can kind of see the altruistic suicide and egoistic suicide are on both sides of the integration, and then anomic suicide, and then the over integration, fatalistic suicide would be on the other side of this. So for Durkheim's perspective, he's looking at large population level studies, right? So this is a risk factor for a population who has experienced some of these things. And you can kind of think of a healthier sort of balance would be kind of right here in the middle, right? You have enough enough integration and enough regulation to make you feel kind of like comfortable and you have a sense of purpose. But when it starts to get too much regulation or too much integration, then there are increased risk factors, and the same on the other side with the too little and the too little regulation and integration. And I'm wondering if maybe people may have some questions at this point or comments. Have you seen folks in your work that have reflected some of these social circumstances that have come then as an individual into a crisis center, I certainly see this in psychiatric emergency services, and I see this in patient psychiatry at the VA frequently. Anyone have any comments about that? Yeah.
My name is Gary. I work at Redondo Los Niños. We work with families in crisis. We have a daycare center, and then we have wraparound services for the family. I have a client, for instance, that we had housing for her for a whole year for free, right? And now it's coming to an end here in July. And in that period of time, she would get jobs that were almost make it impossible for her to actually accomplish the jobs because she had 4 children, right? One job she had working at night in the hospital, and she had to leave the job because CYFD found out she was leaving the kids by herself. She got a job about a month ago, all the way up in Rio Rancho, and she lives up here in the Heights. And so she made it almost impossible for her to get to work. Her car broke down. She has saved no money. We've had to pay her utility bills almost every month since she's lived there. And she's not a stupid person. She's an intelligent person, but it's like impossible to move her. It's like she's just stuck in this. I'm trying to figure out which one of these sections she's in because, if there was ever a person I had she's actually told me the only reason she's never committed suicide is because of her kids. And so, because I do run a suicide prevention program here at Redondo. And so I'm just trying to figure out where she fits in here because she's like all 4 of these people at different times.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And you're also bringing up something that's really important in terms of like an individual factor. So she has an individual protective factor that she lives for, and that's for her children, right?
Right.
I would definitely say that she has too little regulation, right? She has a real sense of normlessness. So that would be kind of over on the anomic side of things. I wouldn't say she has too much regulation because she hasn't gotten she hasn't been in a system where every single thing that happens is like mandated and scheduled sort of for her, like you might see in the military or something like that, right? So she's more on the anomic side, and she's having to probably do a lot of things that are not in kind of a sense of norms and regulations that she would choose, right? So she's having to choose things that are different than the way she might identify.
And she has turned to criminal endeavors in the past,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing. She had a car that she couldn't make the payments on, and they, how the car company turns off your car and you don't make the payments. Well,
Mm-hmm.
she actually went on YouTube and actually learned how to disable it, so she was able to drive the car. And
Yeah.
the company thought it would, but I was like, I tried to do that. I went on YouTube to see if I could figure it out, and I was like, no way. And I don't know how she did it, but she was amazing at it. She got it going, and
Yeah.
the car's broken down. It's really crazy.
And that is like a very common thing that you see with folks who feel that they don't have any choices to make that are functional, that would get them into a regulated kind of life where they would enjoy it and feel a sense of purpose and responsibility with it. She does have some regulation in that she's really trying to provide for her children in any way she can, but it seems like she's further over onto the anomic side of population level risk factors.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Dan, I saw that you have a comment in there too.
Yeah, I learned about Durkheim when I was a undergrad, I should say, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's interesting to see, some of the stuff you said about just how Durkheim perceived different races, and he meant the French and the Germans. So it's just the evolution of that. But again, with the comment, it makes me think about community violence and how large groups of people don't feel integrated, and how that may play out in the same, Durkheim studied suicide as a sociological concept, and this community violence, I've just not put it in this context before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also goes to a low, that's both low integration and low regulation, right? Because they feel they don't have any other real option. They're not integrated into society in a conventional way where they can succeed. And so you do have both this like kind of this egoistic and anomic element to that. And I think also that feeds into kind of some gang violence where there's like a normlessness, but then people are craving that integration. And so they join groups that make them feel like they have a sense of identity and purpose and unity within those smaller groups. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both for those comments. Anyone else have things they wanted to share about this? Okay, we'll go forward to the next slide then. Oh, look at my next slide is actually the end of the presentation. So maybe we should go back and have some more discussion. I do have some suggested reading here with his book, certainly up at the top, but some other really interesting things about sociological concepts in our public kind of crisis response and other things are Goffman, also a very old book, and a lot of this stuff is dated now too, but he thinks about notes about identity and how people sort of go through life trying to sort of pass in one way or another when parts of their identity are stigmatized. And then Michel Foucault was a French, I think really he was a historian, but we talk about him a lot in sociology also. And some of his books, I've listed out here, but The Birth of Biopolitics, that's when he really starts talking about the way the medical community has used race, like medicalized things about race in order to really maintain power in sort of like conventional ways. And medicine has used and been used as sort of like these excuses about various things. You think about going back to slavery, measuring skull size and things like this, which were viewed as scientific. And really, this is not science in the way that I like to think of it. This is more science to prove someone's point. It's like being co-opted and agenda setting. And he writes about power. He writes about madness and civilization. He actually spent time in an institution, and he talks about what we think of as mental illness now versus what we and really like why we think of some things as mental illness now and the way that's productive for society. So thinking about the way that people get caught up in these social systems and sort of labeled because they may be not thinking in the way that is more productive for our society that is in capitalism, right? They're not profitable capitalistic members. And so sometimes people are labeled then. And he talks about how that fits into like just the kind of overall like need of the society to continue to function as it is. And why it speaks to why it's difficult sometimes to create social change as well. Webb Dubois also wonderful writer and more focused on Black sociology. And bell hooks, everyone I'm sure has heard of bell hooks, and she's absolutely wonderful talking about more gendered issues. And she's also a Black feminist. Don Tacott is like a person who writes, and he has lovely books, but also like novels from Haiti. But he also writes this book called Create Dangerously and talks about in this book the danger of artists to express things that are different, that challenge society, basically, and how in societies with more or less regulation, those things can be risking your life to write about those things. And that's just a wonderful book if you want to think about social change and what it takes and kind of the power of these social structures to really smush people into the box that they need to be in order for society to view people as functional. And going back to this woman that you brought up, let's see, now I've got another window over your.
Well, what does spoiled identity mean?
Say it again. Spoiled
What is
identity.
that spoiled
Oh,
identity?
with the Goffman?
Right.
Yeah, so that is a sense of your identity is not acceptable by society. So I think like a good modern example of this might be the transgender community, who they strongly identify, and their identity is not spoiled for themselves, but in terms of presenting to society, they feel a lot of pressure to conform, and people feel this pressure to not be who they are, which impacts when they're able to like clearly state their identity. And there's a question. Oh, it's an attendance thing. So just tremendous amounts of pressure. You can also think about this as colorism, even so sort of the whiter the Black person is, the more closely they're able to align with like the sort of power structure of white power, even though, and so even within someone who identifies as Black, that person has this sort of pressure, I guess social pressure would be how Gotham would describe it, to pass as being as white as they can be in order to succeed in these structures where there's all this pressure to have a certain identity. And I think we can probably all recognize that in the United States, especially with like the gender and sexuality stuff too, the pressure is still, even though we try to get better and better about accepting everyone and really trying to appreciate differences and how they contribute. We certainly can't have people who are all thinking the exact same way and create anything that's functional.
Well, what's weird is here at Quidando, domestic violence is a big thing, right? Okay, but we have these incredible teachers here who've gone to school and work with these kids every day, and a lot of them are from Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico, all right? And they've accomplished all this stuff. They've been through sexual abuse, domestic violence, some of them. They've come from really bad situations from their home, and they've gone to college and they've become teachers, right?
Right.
Now we have our clients who are from the United States, and we can't get them off the ground.
Yeah.
We can't get them off the ground. And I'm trying to figure out a way to have a peer thing so these people can tell their stories and make these people from the United States, these women from the United States, understand that they have been through the same thing and they managed to accomplish things in their life, and it's really weird. I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
We talk about it all the time.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I agree with you. I have experienced that also a lot with immigrants seeming to be just push harder. And of course, that's not always the case. It's maybe more that we don't see the people who have pushed through it as much, who were born here because they have enough advantages to have gotten past the point of needing so much help if they were pushing through all that.
Well, they create really strong communities within themselves.
Yeah, they do. That
Yeah.
sense of integration.
Right. And like a lot of the people that we have deal with in the United States, they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to create a community where they can, reflect off each other.
You're absolutely right. And I think that goes to sort of the collectivistic culture of a lot of countries where people have immigrated from, and then they have a shared identity that is that we are here together and we're new here, and so they create community around that as well, and so they have that sense of integration, whereas people who have struggled a lot in the United States sometimes may feel that they're not integrated at all, and not know how to create that because we tend towards individualism here.
Right.
Dan, I see you have your hand raised as well.
Sure. So Mary, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm board president of a nonprofit called Breaking the Silence, which works to raise awareness and understanding about mental illness and suicide prevention.
Good. Thank you so much for doing that work.
Sure. What do we do with this? Because it's a good refresher.
Yeah.
I've always liked what Durkheim had to say, and that this what seems like an incredibly individual action has a social context.
Yeah.
So what can we do from what you presented today?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that question. That's really important. So I think one of the things is to kind of watch for these things. I certainly see it a lot in the vet population where people feel really purposeless after they discharge from the military and really become quite depressed and can become suicidal. We see that a lot, right? So, and I think that I'm sure you see this in many ways in your work as well. And so I think one of the things is to recognize that going back kind of over to this axis here, you can think of how can we integrate and regulate someone who is low on those things, right? Like, are there groups? Are there support groups? Are there things that we can make people feel connected with that might be helpful, sort of more group things? And then I think just really trying to focus on people, some of the more individualistic, less population level things, like what are your reasons for living? What are the things that bring you hope and joy at times when you're not feeling depressed? And really accentuating those things and encouraging people to focus on those things as much as they can. Of course, we have many people who are hand to mouth, and that feels impossible. But just really trying to get people to recall those times when they have felt joy and felt a purpose, and really trying to think through those things with them. I also do think that becoming more integrated in people find religious groups also very helpful, people who have strong faith, and just feeling a sense of purpose and integration and regulation, and getting people talking with other folks who may have been through similar things, right? So that can help people not feel so alone and isolated in things, and just think about other people have been through this. Oh, this person understands me and can identify with some of the things that I'm saying, which I think is also going back to thinking about people who are immigrants tend toward having a sense of community about things, because they do have a common sense of what people have gone through, and they share some of those experiences. Yeah, Yvette, I see that you're raising your hand.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking of, I work in the schools, I work in the public school system.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a student this past school year that she's always having suicidal tendencies. But I know, I mean, this is my interpretation. I feel that she's, saying she's going to do this or that as far as suicide, when she's not getting her way, or when she's angry, or when, the teacher's not doing something. So basically she's not getting her way. But it becomes, and I'm just wondering, how do you handle those situations? I mean, I don't know if you do that, but how do you deal with something like that? An individual that, has suicidal, is saying they're going to hurt themselves, throughout the year, but it's when they're not getting their way. I just feel it's more attention in that manner, not that they're hurting or that they're isolated, or it's just, I'm not getting my way, so I'm going to do this.
Yeah. And certainly that's someone who is probably feeling a reduced sense of power in their life and an ability to sort of influence things. And so you could think of that as being as like a regulation thing, or even integration where they don't feel they can be of influence. And so then you sort of are having too much. So that's more the egoistic thing. And you can hearing what you're saying, where it sounds like this person is making those kinds of comments about things when they're not able to wield influence. And so that makes sense. I would say in those cases, thinking about just acknowledging, kind of really validating what this person is thinking and going through, and then trying to kind of dig underneath just to find out what are these things, why are they important, what's making you feel hopeless right now. The problem is that there are certainly some kinds of personalities where they will go too far and hurt themselves. When you kind of think about borderline personality, they're wanting to have this very deep connection and attachment with people and with their community. And when they don't have that, they become very dysregulated emotionally, and they can hurt themselves. And so, of course, we want to try to keep that person safe. But yeah, I think just in those kinds of situations, talking about the person with, in terms of what are the things that make them feel safe, what is trying to get underneath what is making them want to hurt themselves right now. And sometimes folks like this have been through a lot of trauma and really feel like threatened when they don't have control of a situation. So trying to dig in a little bit. I think that's pretty hard to do in a school situation. So you may be kind of limited to really focusing on safety and safety planning with this person. But yeah, I would try to dig underneath it to see if you can figure out what's really going on. Especially,
Well, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyone else have comments about things that they've seen in their workplace and things that we can talk through as a group? Oh yeah, I think I've got also, let me see. I can see that the survey has been posted. Here's also a QR code in case folks need that. So I'm hoping today you've gotten a good sense of sort of being able to differentiate individual risk factors from sociologic risk factors, population level, but also, so you can see these things are different, but they're also related. So I'm hoping that you've got a good sense of that. And then just kind of how to incorporate it into your work. And anyone have any questions about the 3 learning objectives? I can go back to that slide if folks are, let's see. Anyone have questions about or comments about any of these? All right, thank you all for being here.
Could you show that slide after this one?
Yes, absolutely. The Durkheim.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I might have missed the first 2 or 3 slides.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I can rewind for you. Thank you for being here. Okay, I see I have a question for how do we use this information for community? So yeah, I think that with the community, it's really about looking at population. I think of using this information for community as looking at public health. How does this information impact public health? And I think that this is like about people's general access to things, people's ability to have a life where they sort of have access to being able to be integrated, or if they feel like they're isolated even within the community and they're not integrating into any group, then feeling like they have a shared sense of purpose there. And then also, I think in terms of just the regulation Yes. Oh, Carolyn, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so difficult to deal with. Do you have any ideas about what was going on underneath that? Does it seem like people are just struggling without a sense of ability um, to kind of pull themselves out? Are they experiencing like a lack of access, or are they experiencing like a sense of hopelessness that's coming from socially constructed problems?
I'm not sure. Some of them are just people that I know from other people. One of those deaths was a relative of mine
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
kind of like Gary was saying, kind of fit in all of them. Kind of, I felt like some kind of attention, but also feeling very unloved.
Yeah.
Um, but so in my community in June, there was uh, four,
Mm,
four suicides.
yeah.
And like I said, since my family was one of them, we did have some other family members tell us that, hey, we couldn't go to your funeral because guess what? This was actually my cousin that was telling us. Guess what? She said, one of my nephew was cutting himself, attempting to kill himself. And she says, and at the same time, we're also dealing with my niece from a different community and a different um, sibling also
Yeah.
thinking of that. So, if they had actually accomplished that, that would have been two more.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know
Really scary.
what is going on with the other ones. Don't really know what was going on with my relative.
Yeah.
Except that, yeah, there was some changes. There was a divorce coming up, single mother that was going to be taking care of children.
Yeah.
But even she had said, I know I can still manage with what I'm earning. So that was very um to me it was a surprise of what happened.
Yeah, it's so shocking when it happens. And the feeling of heaviness and heartbreak is so intense. Um, I think that talking about some of this stuff, including the stigma of having mental health problems, and in our really individualistic society in the United States, people feel they have to hide this. They have to hide behavior where they are hurting themselves. And it's very difficult sometimes to know what's going on with folks. I think whenever you're looking around the community and you see that someone that you love is going to go through a big change, like a divorce is a big change, that's like a whole new set of norms. Even if they feel loved and feel that they'll be provided for, sometimes people who are already experiencing stigma, maybe, and mental illness like depression and hopelessness, it can become quite overwhelming. And they sort of feel that it's not a livable situation and maybe feel that their own life doesn't have impact. And so it's just so hard. But I think really all of us who work in the public health sphere, all of us can be on the lookout for some of these things, the big changes with folks, and think about that's like a population level increase of a risk factor, but also it can impact an individual who's going through that.
I'm in a 10-year recovery from a gambling addiction, right? I
Mm-hmm.
never went to a casino until I was like 53 years old. I'm 73 now.
Yeah.
And I had a former life before that, though. I used to be a landscape architect. I lived in Corrales. I had a lot of friends. I had family. I had interests and hobbies and everything, right?
Yeah.
So my recovery was made easier because I had all those things to reflect back on and rebuild my life with.
Yeah.
When I have clients and I say, well, what was your life like before? Or what was it? They don't know. They never had a previous life. They never had anything that they can use to rebuild on, to go back to find that community that used to be safe for them. They
Yeah.
never had they
Absolutely.
never had that in their life, you know.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right. I've certainly saw that when I was a housing case manager, and I've certainly seen that in psychiatric emergency services too. And I think when you're dealing with folks in your work who are experiencing that, it's also just really important to know, to really let people know, you can frame it if you think the person isn't going to be talking about these kind of subjects deeply with you. This may seem silly to you, but here are the ways that you can reach out if you're in a crisis. And it might be what a crisis looks like. If you're feeling hopeless and you're having trouble finding a sense of meaning, that they can reach out. We have amazing help in New Mexico in terms of psychiatric emergency services and crisis intervention and things like that. Because it's not silly. It's scary. It's really frightening, I think, how hopeless folks can become.
Lonely.
Yeah.
It's lonely. People are lonely.
And isolated.
Right.
And that feeling of isolation, I think, when people don't know about other resources, that feeling of isolation just can grow and become very scary in terms of people's decision making.
Well, that's why peer support is so important.
Yeah, very important. Anyone else have comments about some of what we're talking about today? Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing that very painful time in your community with us. It's really important to talk about those things.
So if nobody has any comment or message, I think we can end our presentation here. I would like to thank you, Dr. Mathison, for your wonderful, interactive and informative session. I really like your techniques of open floor for communicating with everyone. So yeah, I'm ending the session now and hope to see you for the next one.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks,